Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Whose Side News. Today is October 11th, 2012. And welcome to our program. My name is Julia Dudley Najib. I'll be your host for this news segment. And we have a couple of topics to talk to you about today. One, of course, was dealing with the most recent discussion about why President Barack Obama in that particular debate wasn't doing too well, so he did comment on Diane Sawyer's show last night. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And we also get to discuss, of course, about what his wife thinks about him and how she supports him. And finally, we'll get to our infamous cloud. But the first news of today that we shall be dealing with is this affirmative action case. You wouldn't believe how many issues there are surrounding this case. So, as I said, the affirmative action case, there's a part to it, and it's coming from the root. We like to get all of our information from African American and African sources, and so this discussion is coming straight from the root. And they title it "The Great Affirmative Action Lie," and this is on their website. You can find the story, and it has to do with the extension of the young lady Abigail, who 2008 was denied because she was not the head of her class. So we'll be hearing of the top 10%. So we'll be hearing about that and a little bit about both sides of that. And then finally tonight we have the VP debate. And so this will be interesting because we have Vice President Joe Biden and Vice President hopeful Paul+Ryan. And then, of course, we'll talk about our infamous cloud. And again, for the first news of the day, it has to do with the affirmative action case part 2. And this case, the reason why it's at the forefront is because now people are speaking about it, and now it's gone beyond what the courts feel about it. We're having opinions from both sides, of those for affirmative action and those against. Let's hear what the root has to say about affirmative action. So, comment from the root says this: 4 decades after legalized discrimination was still codified in law, racial disparities persist at nearly every level of American society, from criminal justice to education, employment to housing. Minorities in general, and African Americans in particular, continue to face an uphill battle towards social and economic equity. Affirmative action policies, originally designed to redress problems created by centuries of slavery and Jim Crow, are being derided by some as racial discrimination against white people. The fundamental ideology is being challenged this week in a U.S. Supreme Court case, Fisher versus University of Texas, in which a white woman claimed she was disadvantaged in college admissions. A similar argument failed in 2003, but today's more conservative court may be more apt to side with the plaintiff, since the white victim mentality has recently gained mainstream momentum, both in education and politics. What this article goes on to say is that there seems to be white privilege, and they feel that white America is forgetting about this notion of white privilege that does exist, whether we want to accept it or not. And the article does make claims towards the fact that Abigail is not looking at her white privilege, or neither is George Will, who also has made comments saying that the law needs to change in university and everyone needs to be equal. What is the reason for this law? George Will being the Republican in support of getting rid of affirmative action in universities. The article also goes on to explain that for centuries, African Americans have been disenfranchised, starting with slavery. 300 plus years, people want to say 300, fine. Some people say 400. The point is, hundreds of years of slavery, there's been disenfranchisement, meaning when a African American person off of a plantation, by the time the 1800s, late 1800s, they were free, where were they to go? From not having clothes, shelter, or money, there was nowhere to go. So having to build from the ground up and having the expectation that that was okay to do was a total disparity, and that America did not acknowledge at the time. And even when affirmative action was put in place at the time, it was mostly the white female that benefited with such of the regulations of affirmative action. And so those are things that perhaps the article is suggesting a civil lesson needs to be given to Abigail, who is not looking at the history behind affirmative action, nor is she looking at perhaps the history behind what has happened with people that have taken affirmative action. And there's some comments about affirmative action that we'll get into in just a moment here. Continuing on with these points, the article, we're going to go back to the article, in fact, right now. Let's do that. Okay, so going on, the article makes a point of Joanne Walsh in her new book, What's the Matter with White People? Posits that too many whites incorrectly believe that minorities have benefited from affirmative action at their expense. Walsh takes a historic view, showing that most white Americans enjoyed the benefits of the Great Society social welfare programs, in particular the post-war GI Bill, expansion of public universities, FHA mortgage lending guarantees, and union jobs. Together, these benefits created upward mobility for a strong middle class. They were social welfare programs amounting to affirmative action government policies for poor and low-income whites, and often, almost explicitly, excluded African Americans and other people of color. So hence again, we still have the problem that people are assuming that most African Americans benefited from the affirmative action, and it's just simply not the case, and this continues to be part of the case. Now, we'll also be looking at a few comments that talk about how affirmative action also creates racism, because when people get into these universities and they're looking at different minorities that have made it in, particularly African Americans, especially if it's a prestigious university, they assume, and in their mind they're thinking, oh, well, that person got in because of affirmative action. So you have that problem of that's an inner sense of racism even at the university, and also that is indirect racism or stereotypes that that individual feels and that has been taught. Would be from the family, to have that assumption and low opinion of black people in general. So that part is unfortunate. On the other hand, it's for those individuals that do get into these different programs and universities because of affirmative action, it's because they're on the upper echelon of folks that are able to take advantage of this opportunity. It is not because they're the low-end African American that is not intelligent or doesn't have the brains. It's on the contrary, they may not have the funding, the monies, which has again been the history of black communities when we're looking at people that have tried to make a way, whether it was Princeton, which for a long time the article talks about, did not allow or found a way to not allow African Americans to get in, and hence this is a sense of white privilege. And so these as prestigious universities that did not allow African Americans in, that is a sense of privilege that we're not recognizing or looking at. And it wasn't like at that time that an African American person could stand up and say, well, they're not letting me in. I want to fight this. I want to sue the university. The university probably would have laughed at that time and said ridiculous. And so we have affirmative action for university and programs like that to help diversify. Texas being one of those states definitely that needs that diversity, and is still working on that as we are in the 2012 era, and looking at how can they diversify. That is one way. And I just hope that people begin to look at it differently when they assume that someone has gotten in because of affirmative action and have meeting the quota. That person has gotten in probably because they're in the upper echelon. And those are just some thoughts to think about. Now let's go ahead and look at some of those comments that are being said in regards to this affirmative action case, which is ongoing. And it's curious to see what other people and organizations are feeling about this, besides George Will, the Republican that has stood out and said, we have to stop this, and Abigail as well. So we'll take a look at the other items. This is one comment, and this person is Thomas Vlogger, who is a subscriber to The Root. He says, I'm most sympathetic to the arguments against affirmative action that suggest that it is not working very well for racial minorities. African Americans, for instance, have technically had full rights of citizenship for most of my life. After a mere 300 plus years of varied forms of oppression, and yet things are not so good for so many of them, affirmative action has failed to level the field, and some pundits even suggest that it has made matters worse. I suppose it's possible that they are correct, though it seems a hard thing to ascertain with any certainty. Sure, some people see an African student at university and think they wouldn't be there if they weren't black, but how different is that from thinking he shouldn't be there because he is black? And again, that's by Thomas Vlogger, and we'll be looking at the next comment as well. But before we look at that comment, let's kind of discuss this comment that accentuates on how affirmative action may not have been as successful for African Americans. And we look at the black male, who certainly in the society, it's always been a challenge. It's been an uphill battle from the moment that that individual was born and his or her descendants were born. into slavery, starting way from back there. Talk about not having a lifeboat or a preserver and you don't know how to swim. So when we look at the black male in America, once we raise a black male up, it actually helps the community, and helps the family and so forth. But if that were the case, if we really wanted to do that, it seems like it would have already been done or recognized. Instead, like we talked about yesterday, there's more prisons and incarceration systems to help with the black male, right? And so we have to look at another way. If this program is not working, affirmative action, which it seems to be geared towards other groups and other minority, other people of color, then we do need something else in place that fits and that's going to work. And so when this a particular person is talking about looking at, it's a sympathetic argument against affirmative action because it's not working for African Americans. This is a very valid point, and this is something that we brought up in yesterday's broadcast. And so there has to be something else. And of course, there is something else. We just haven't done it yet or haven't acknowledged yet because people have proposed other solutions. The next comment from the root, again, is this person's called themselves the ghost of Lenny Bruce. Affirmative action exists as a balance against the historically documented corruptive nature of power. When those in power stop using such authority to promote their own self-interest, then discussion can begin regarding the end of affirmative action. Until then, however, affirmative action measures must remain in place, protected by the courts, and enhanced as opposed to weakened. Protected by the courts. Interesting point when we're talking about power. That seems to be a commonality here in the United States when it comes to power and the oppressed. So the beginning oppressed, if I'm looking at the black community, that oppression began and started for years. Even in the 1800s, in the Reconstruction period, when there was a time when black businesses were flourishing, unfortunately, and there were no laws in place to stop people that had that racism and discrimination and that inner hate to just demolish these villages. You know, you look at things like Burning Mississippi. There's so many more movies like that that are based on real, and I have to commend Mario Van Peebles and the Van Peebles family for really portraying some of the movies and things that happened from black cowboys to black people in general and early history of America when they were doing well and they were at one point in the political system, and then that was stopped by our own government to stop them from voting. You know, you were considered 3/4 of a man, not a full man. So these are things we have to consider when just in voting rights and not having those type of rights. That disenfranchisement expands for years and affected communities and families for years. And so as we begin to honor everyone's opinion, that's important. We also have to begin to look at realities in order for change to really come about, in order for us to be able to have a tolerance and have an understanding of people's culture and diversity. So I challenge those of you who challenge affirmative action, what's another solution? What's a better way, or what's another way? Meanwhile, there's still other topics for discussion that we definitely want to discuss. So let's take a look at the next item on our Whose Side program. I hate that these goofy looks I have when they transit to another phase. Another slide. Anyway, we have tonight's vice presidential debate, and we're also going to be talking about the response that Michelle Obama had in regards to supporting her husband. But looking at tonight's vice presidential debate, and that would be, of course, between Vice President Joe Biden and Vice President hopeful Paul+ryan. And there are some of those concerns that people discuss. So some of those concerns are really based on, I don't know how that slide keeps getting in there. Some of those concerns are really based on people's opinion of how Biden will do and how Ryan will do. And so it says both Biden and Ryan head in the debate with vulnerabilities. Biden must reign in a free-willing manner that can be endearing, but also produces plenty of gaffes. Ryan hasn't been in a campaign debate for more than a decade and is light on foreign policy experience, a sharp contrast to the vice president, a former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Ryan also will need to find a way to reinforce Romney's policy positions without selling out his own more conservative credentials. And the debate is going to be happening at Central College tonight. And so we hear President Obama, who claimed last night, he said, well, you know, the whole idea for tomorrow's debate, what the key is for Joe Biden to be Joe Biden. Some people challenge that and say, no, Joe Biden shouldn't be Joe Biden, because sometimes he can go off the cusp and make those comments that you don't know where they came from, and you wonder when they'll go away. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll stay in the media. Now, the Joe Biden that should be tonight is the one that was at the DNC, and when he spoke his speech, he pretty much stayed on the even path, didn't really go veer off too far to the right or to the left. He pretty much did well in staying center on the issues. So I couldn't say that, although there's some media out there saying that it depends on this vice presidential debate on the direction of how people are going to vote. I don't really agree with that. And the reason being is that most people have already made their vote. Most people have already made their decision. And not only that, people who supported their presidential candidate beforehand most likely are supporting that same candidate. And these polls and these debates are for the undecided, which is a small fraction if you're looking at, the amount of from Republican to Democrats to Green Party to independents who already have in their mind, set in their mind exactly who they're voting for. We look at the undecided vote, and it's got to be in the below 10% at least. So these emotional polls, I don't know if they're polling undecided independents, but I know that in the polls they're just that, emotions. They're going to go up and down. We talked about how that's really about the media, creating kind of a circus around that. And tonight's debate is just really seeing how equipped Paul+Ryan is to be able to handle some of these issues and stick to the issues of Governor Mitt Romney's more moderate than conservative view outlook. When I say conservative, because Paul+Ryan is a lot more conservative, even compared to Governor Mitt Romney's views. So his job is to stick to the ticket of whatever Governor Mitt Romney is proposing. He's got to stick to that. Granted, though, Governor Mitt Romney has flip-flopped on different positions. So as long as he can remember which position and what to say, he should be okay. He's got a debonair smile. People like him. He's just as popular, just like President Barack Obama is popular. And so people are looking at the looks. I'm sorry, but this is American public, and we tend to go off of how people look. And so people are doing that. He's young, vibrant, and people like that as well. So he's got that plus side to him that is in his favor. Although people are saying he may not have the experience in debating and he's just a baby, he's not that much of a baby. He's able to stand on his own 2 feet. He's past 40 years old. I think he'll be okay in that respect, and maybe we shouldn't take those things for granted. Meanwhile, it's just a matter of whose side will we choose. And looking at Black America, you'll find that even Black America is not all supporting President Barack Obama. And we'll talk about that in our infamous cloud that we're going to be bringing up shortly. But let's see what Michelle Obama has been talking about when she's saying, you know what, I support my husband no matter what. Not only that, but there's a lot of Black women behind him that are also supporting him too. So let's take a look. So Michelle Obama defends husband and says Black women have her hubby's back. She says, I'm biased. I think my husband has done a phenomenal job, not just in the debate, but over these last 3.5 years. And I continue to be in awe with just how poised and consistent and honest he is. And his ability to lay out detailed and common sense plan, that's what Mrs. Obama is saying, is that she does honor that. And we can say that it's pretty well managed plan when you're looking at if you go to the site and you're able to look at how he's laying out the plan. And even when we were in DC this past summer, he even discussed the plan that he's doing with small businesses and trade, even though that hasn't really come down the wire in the mainstream. There's so much information out there to come down the wire that's probably too much to try to get to. And that's when you got to use your grassroots media outlets like ourselves and others, and hope that people get the information, because if not, they're not going to get the information. Meanwhile, Michelle talks about the support of her husband Barack Obama by most Black women, with the exception of a few, because they have some of the same issues and the grave issues that he's discussed before. So she continues by saying, voting is our most important nonviolent tool for change. And every now and then there is that reminder that someone with a different agenda may come in and completely disagree with everything that we take for granted. So if we want to protect it, young people, you've got to be at the table. If you want to define the country, you are going to inherit. Otherwise, you can't be mad. So that goes to say why voting is so important. We ask for all these changes and we want change. And some of us don't vote. We think someone else is going to do it. Let someone else take care of it. I was talking to someone pretty close to me. I know this person really well. I won't expose them. But the individual, who's rather young, 21, 22 years old, commented that this person has no reason to vote. not even an interest, and just hopes that a certain candidate wins. And speaking to this person, I said, well, that's the problem. You're able to vote, and yet you're not registered. And this individual happened to be African American, and is assuming that everybody else is going to take care of the problem. Let everyone else create the change. You got to be a part of the change if that's what you're wanting, whether it be for either candidate. But this is the strange views in our community we stick to. We think that there's enough of us in the community that can take care of the problem, when really there needs to be more of us getting involved and supporting, from supporting healthcare, black businesses, supporting our youth. There's so many things we need to get involved in. We keep thinking somebody else is going to take care of it, or the government's going to take care of it. In all actuality, we have to be the ones to take care of it. There's a final comment by Mrs. Michelle Obama, so let's see her final comment, as she says. For me, when I talk to black women, when I see them out there, the issues are the same. It's fighting about health care. The issue of health reform is a black woman's issue. In so many instances, not only do you have gender disparities, but you have race disparities. If you look at breast cancer and the like, many of us black women get it. Illness in a more dramatic form. Many of us are still late in getting preventive care and doing our mammograms. And then if you don't have access to the preventive care, you don't have a regular doctor, you're not able to go to a nutritionist, then we catch our diseases way down the road. We're stage 4 by the time we are diagnosed. I can definitely relate to this. And the reason why I say I can relate to this is because my own mother, who passed away from cancer, she was diagnosed very late. It was in the final stages. But not only that, I relate to why African Americans do not feel comfortable about doctors or the healthcare system or the way things are as it stands. And the reason why, I look at my mother, who she had a mass that was acknowledged when she was in Washington, the state of Washington, and she had emergency surgery at that time. And this is maybe at least a year, oh gosh, no, 2 or 3 years before she ended up passing away. About 2 years. So this mass was recognized in Washington, and when she came back to California, the doctors who acknowledged the mass kind of just let it go, just forgot about it, didn't really care about it. Even when we asked about it, just said, oh, it's benign, nothing to worry about. That concerns me because my mother had she had health insurance at the time. She was a regional vice president of Citibank. So it was unfortunate that the doctors seemed not to care. This seems to be the same commonality that we see amongst African Americans that are afraid of the doctor, don't trust the doctor, think the doctor is out to get them or is not in the best interest, wants them to die. So we have those type of stereotypes, or things that really happen. I won't even call them stereotypes, because for some people, this has really happened, where the doctors do not take care of them. Or if they're on Medi-Cal, they definitely get mistreated, or they get stereotyped because they're on Medi-Cal, or they assume that because they're on Medi-Cal, they're not intelligent, when really it might mean that they just need a little bit of help. Especially when we're looking at our young people who are needing a little bit of help and assistance, and are needing medical assistance to go to the next level because they don't have a job to get the health insurance. So this is something that we do need to take care of and look at. And I know that the Affordable Health Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, is something that is in place to address this very issue. Then you'll have more African American people be more trusting of the doctor and willing to go in. Hopefully that be the case. But I know, and history says, that has not been the case, but we'll have to see about that. So those are the comments that we had from Michelle. And these comments do hold weight when we're looking at mammograms, and I know that there's a large majority of our African American community that just don't do this. Well, meanwhile, it's time to get to our Whose Side Infamous Cloud Review, and this is where we look at the latest things going on in our internet world, in our Facebook world, and also in what's happening in the Black diaspora and African diaspora. So our Whose Side Cloud can be found on our Anne Marie Pro TV site, or AMP TV Now. You can go to the site and play around with your little mouse, and if you hover over the different subjects, you'll see there's different things that'll pop up. Some of them are news items, such as Black Beautiness, Black America, and it says Black women went from calling themselves queens to calling themselves the B word. Bad bees. America has broken too many of our, and the article goes on, so I won't go into that, but This is under broken, and that's just happened to be something that popped up, the words that popped up. And America in itself, that seems to be the topic of the latest hour. I know yesterday there's a lot of stuff going on about President Barack Obama and his debate and so forth and where he stands. This one is really about the whole black woman issue. Seems like that seems to be popping up. Don't know why that's popping up. And the cloud is just, again, it's whatever's happening at the moment. It's whatever's going on. I know before, Stacey Dash, I couldn't remember her name yesterday, but I remember it today. She's the actress that is actually in support of Governor Mitt Romney, and there's a lot of derogatory comments towards her, which I do not support. I support everyone having their own views and judgment. First Amendment right gives us that freedom of speech to support and say what we want to say, but at the same time, we don't need to be derogatory or disrespectful to a sister because she wants to support Governor Mitt Romney. That's her choice. There's a lot of African American people that are supporting Governor Mitt Romney. One would be surprised. And they are coming out and saying that. And that is okay. Meanwhile, Black America, if you're wanting President Barack Obama to have that second term, hence it's important for you to vote. You can't assume that a few black people are just going to go to the polls and vote and get you your president that you want, those of you wanting President Barack Obama. And at the same time, there's no need for us to disrespect anyone that is not voting for President Barack Obama. And one thing that article talked about that I didn't get to say, and you can go back to News One to find out more about it, is Michelle Obama said, look, my husband's only had 3.5 years. It's the same thing she said last night on the program. 3.5 years is not a lot of time, but there's a lot of reform that happened within 3.5 years. 4 more years, they can get to the point where the structure that they wanted to get to the next step. So in our infamous cloud, we have from Haiti, what's going on in Haiti and Africa, and some of the things that are going on worldwide to our African and African American communities, and also what people are thinking at the moment. And so it looks like that's what people are thinking about at the moment. And we click on America, and it's that black woman comment. I don't know why that's popping up everywhere I go. I can't even get any other news. My gosh. And there's still the earthquake relief that we have to look at that's happening in Haiti. It's not over. So those are things to look at. So moving on, it looks like we're just about at our close. This has been a wonderful program. We got just for 2 topics, we had a lot of information to tell you, and that's sometimes the way it goes in Whose Side News. Eventually, we'll be having different guests and some of our news, African American news correspondents from our radio shows, and also from our news shows, also from our blogs and newspapers. So stay tuned for more. I enjoyed the program. Hopefully, you did too. My name is Julia Dudley Najib. Have a great week.